I'm joined by three very distinguished panelists, all of whom worked for at least two of the major international auction houses who were founded way back in the 18th century. I think it's worth slightly remembering that back in the 18th century, things were rather different. Then auction houses were essentially wholesalers who sold art on behalf of private individuals to dealers who would then sell them on to collectors. As I think we heard earlier today from Amy Capelazzo, the art auction business has changed quite dramatically. Auction houses now sell directly to private clients, both through auctions and private sales. In addition, auction houses have their own galleries. Rather controversially, for some, they offer art advisory services and manage artists' estates, arguably more controversially. But they have also enormous marketing power. We discussed the Leonardo that made that astounding 450.3 million. And then just yesterday, we had another big rabbit come out of the hat when Sotheby's announced a Modigliani nude from the collection. Well, they didn't announce it, but it emerged in the press, from a Irish collector called John Mania, a horse breeder. And that is estimated and guaranteed at $150 million, which is the highest estimate on any work of art so far. So I wanted to start with you, Dominique. And to what extent are auction houses and dealers collaborators or competitors?
I think we're both. Sometimes we compete and sometimes we collaborate. But at the end of the line, it's two very different professions. Being a gallerist or being an auction houses have two different motivations, two different goals. But I think there are places where it's a very fruitful collaboration.
Ed, what do you think?
No, I definitely agree with that. I'm always quite careful about using the word collaboration.
What about
having gone through the Department of Justice inquiry into price fixing between Christie's and Sotheby's? No, I mean, my experience of our world is that we obviously compete for every consignment that comes up, whether we're competing about dealers, other auction houses. But essentially it is a very collaborative business. I mean, we're all sitting here in this room. We all know each other. We're sitting here with museum directors, gallery owners, auction house people, and there's a huge amount of shared resolve, I suppose, and shared experience. And all that comes together quite often to create business opportunities in our world. And I've always believed that the most successful people in our business are the people who do collaborate legally, of course, the most. And there are huge opportunities for dealers to work with auction houses. Capital and finance and the amounts of money that are now required. I mean, most dealers find it very difficult to get anywhere near the sums of money required. Auction houses are a source of funding for deals, etc., etc. So, I mean, I think we are in a different world, and I think inevitably we've been collaborating more and more closely for some time.
And Marc, do you share this vision of sweet collaboration?
I think the goal is always to have a sweet relationship, but not necessarily a sweet collaboration. I think that we're both. We're both competitors and collaborators. I would draw a distinction, though, between the secondary market and the primary market. I agree that the primary market is no place for auction houses, and that it requires a completely different structure in order to build the careers of artists. I think when it comes to the secondary market, it is very much a place for auction houses in the guise of private sales, and that there should be no distinction, and that the global footprint of either the great galleries or the auction houses provide equally good distribution options for the clients.
Yes, we need to make it clear with the discussion. Essentially, we're talking about the secondary market, which is the reselling of art, rather than the primary market, where galleries are selling new works, although you have your own primary market and artists as well. So given that we're in the context of the secondary market, the key for success, of course, is getting great works of art. Now, last month, Dominique emerged at Lévy Gorvy at the Art Basel Hong Kong Fair, sold a Willem de Kooning painting for $35 million. Now that's, the journalists have been scratching their heads. We've struggled to come up with a higher price, a published price, a result like that at an art fair sale. So that's obviously a spectacular result. And the painting was sold from the collection of the Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen. Now, Dominique, normally you're actually quite reticent about prices on works and sales, but it became quite a public transaction. I'm just wondering what sort of signal that sale sent out, and what you wanted to say by it.
I think it sends different signals. The first one was that bringing such a work at this art fair at this moment was part of a strategy, and disclosing the former owner was also part of the strategy. So yes, indeed, in general, it's very rare that we would.
So just jump in that. Again, this is very unusual that you disclosed the former owner, the consignor. Why did you think it was a good idea to disclose that?
In this context, we felt that, especially in Asia, the provenance of such a work would make an impact, and it did. The fact that not only the provenance, but also the taste of the collector is something that people would appreciate. The fact that this was a work that had never been at auction, was very fresh to the market. So all the ingredients were there, but the disclosure of ownership here was part of a strategic thinking. Second, I think it was important to show that a great work of art can come to an art fair. There's often been the feeling that if you bring a great work of art at the art fair, there's the risk to overexposure. But there's the same risk if you put it at auction.
Sure.
And so for me, to bring a work of that quality to an art fair and find a buyer for it, signaled that whether it's at auction or privately on the secondary market, you can achieve incredible results, meaningful results. And the art fair has become as important to me, I think, as an auction house, as a vehicle to de-access and also to buy art.
Just very quickly, just a final point. How much of a gamble was it for you?
A huge gamble, but a very well-thought gamble. I think the strategic, I think there was a lot of strategic thinking. There was a lot of planning. The true gamble was for the collector who trusted us on both ways.
Sure. Okay, of course, one advantage auction houses usually have over dealers, and Dominique, I think you might qualify this, is that they can offer sellers a guaranteed minimum price. Now, John Manier has basically got $150 million on the table, and if it sells some more, he'll get a proportion of what we call the overage. Now, in 2 weeks' time in New York, Christie's will be offering the collection of Peggy and David Rockefeller. So that's 1,500 lots of paintings, porcelain and furniture, estimated to raise at least $500 million for charity. That's, I gather, an oldish valuation, 4 years old, that valuation, and people think it may well make $1 billion. So it'll become the most successful single-owner sale in history. Now, it's been reported that Sotheby's offered the estate a guarantee of $650 million. Christie's hasn't revealed its guarantee. Care to enlighten us?
I read of Sotheby's offer.
Now, you spent a long time masterminding the sale of this extraordinary collection. Auctioneering is a notoriously high overhead, low profit business. I wanted to ask you, how difficult was it balancing prestige with profitability when you pitched for this collection?
I think that's the question in every deal that the auction houses enter, is the balance between the amount of money one makes on that particular transaction and the overall brand enhancement, and setting aside the presumption that the auction business is necessarily a low-margin business. For the Rockefeller family, presuming that they believed that they could get equivalent financial deals from either Christie's or Sotheby's. The question for them turned on who would best and most devotedly convey to the public the mission of the Rockefeller family and the various philanthropic interests. Because given that all of the estate's proceeds are destined to charity, the mission of those underlying beneficiary organizations was equally important in all of this. So the execution of the sale program and the storytelling about the family and the foundations and the philanthropic giving was just as important to them and just as important to us as a brand in terms of the sales with which we're identified.
Okay. Can I just ask you quickly, leaving aside money, what are the other factors when there's a huge consignment coming on the table for auction houses? What are the key things that persuades a family typically in these situations?
Ultimately, it is almost always the confidence that they will make the most money possible by engaging a particular auction house or gallerist or dealer.
So is money all about money after all?
Otherwise, it would be a donation.
Yeah, okay.
But in second place, and often a very close second, is the way that the work of art and the collecting family is presented to the market. That may not be the case in a significant number of transactions, which are at some level effectively commodified. But for many of the great works of art, and many of the works of art that may not reach greatness, the sale of them and the public moment is very important to the identity of the family and the seller.
Okay, okay. Now, Ed, we've had a number of conversations about guarantees, and a lot of ink has been spilt over it. A lot of people talk about it. How much do you think that guarantees and the complex financial packages that go with them do you think they artificially inflate prices or distort the market in some way?
No, and I think the use of artificially is a very dangerous thing because it's not the case. A lot of people, I think, are inherently suspicious about guarantees. They're not fantastically complicated things. They're quite easy to understand. I think what has happened recently, because basically the balance sheets of the auction houses cannot stand the level of risk that now has to be taken to support a major sale in New York or London, where hundreds of millions of dollars have been laid out in guarantees. The auction houses now very sensibly lay off that risk
to
interested parties, third parties. And the ideal third party is someone who you know really wants the work of art and has already expressed an interest in acquiring a Modigliani at $150 million. And you leverage the amount of risk you're able to take in any one season by laying it off like this. But what that has done is meant that effectively there's a sort of pre-sale process before the auction itself. And I think that has led to, in some cases, almost a final price being set in that pre-auction discussion, which makes it quite difficult for the auction itself then to take it on. So I think a lot of guarantees now are very successfully sold to what's called the irrevocable bid. And people then think, oh, well, perhaps that's artificial then.
At that moment,
and
it's an
in
auction
fact,
house. Sorry to jump in.
It's just a reflection of a buyer very happy to pay that amount of money. There's nothing artificial about it.
At that moment, is the auction house acting as a dealer in a sense because it's bought the work?
Well, it hasn't bought the work. I mean, it has...
Sorry, sold the work, rather. Pre-sold it.
No, because there's no pre-sale agreement with the backer. The backer may not end up owning the work.
Okay.
And And I think that is a very interesting discussion. And I was just thinking, actually, for the first time, there's no particular reason why a dealer can't offer a guarantee.
Well, I was going to...
I mean, you're saying
Dominique,
they
sorry.
can't offer guarantees. Yeah. A dealer can say, look, I'll take that work in, we'll try and sell it for 5 months. If I don't have any luck,
Dominique, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I'll write you a check out for 3 million. I mean, there's no reason dealers can't.
So how do dealers operate their own guarantee system?
I think there's two things. Number one, I think the guarantee process has changed the auction business because there are suddenly two classes of works. You have the guaranteed works and you have the non-guarantees work. And whether you're a seller, a buyer, an advisor, you look at them differently. And I think the guarantees, I don't see this as a shady business. It's just a business. It just gives an incredible vote of confidence to the work. So it puts the work without guarantee, sometimes not at a disadvantage, but at a different way of looking at them. Now, absolutely, I think dealers, and we do, sometimes we win a consignment by offering a guarantee. Where we are weaker is that we can't offer the upside in the same way.
Sure,
we can't request that competitive. But there's many other things that one can offer, from the discretion to a very targeted marketing. And we've all seen buyers that will pay the premium to buy privately, to be the only one. So I think, yes, we can offer guarantee. Yes, the guarantees has changed the auction business. And yes, it has made it more difficult for dealers.
Okay. People often talk about the sort of balance of power between dealers and auction houses. And I'm just wondering whether there's a slight elephant in the room in that in recent years, what seems to me the most powerful group of people that don't really get talked about are the actual private collectors who are transacting in the market. To give an example, I spoke to one collector, and he was at the front of the queue for buying a Gerhard Richter 10 years ago. I said, what's it like being at the front of the queue? And he said, it's like being given a bucket of money. because the price was so far below the auction price. And yet, of course, when they come to sell, enormous guarantees are being offered in terms of money on the table. What's your feeling about, Marc, this shift towards, it's not really written about or spoken about that much, but the tremendous power that these wealthy private collectors have?
I think it's always been the case. The patrons or the buyers of the greatest works of art, of course, have the most power because they are, at the end of the transacting, buying the great things. For me, it goes to the issue of why I think third-party guarantees are actually pro-competitive and dispute the idea that it artificially raises prices. I think that third-party guarantees assure that a small number of potential buyers in the market are forced to compete because they know, in fact, that somebody else will get it if they don't. So far from being about assuring that that single collector gets access to the great works of art, it allows many other people to get access to them.
Okay. But when these enormous auction prices are achieved, there seems to be a little bit of a shortfall here because they get enormous publicity, don't they? Like the Leonardo and so on. Now, in terms of analysis of sales, dealers, I think, are thought to have slightly more sales overall in the global marketplace. And yet there's very, very little publicity about the sales they make. That was what's so unusual about the de Kooning prize. Do you think it distorts things or leads to misconceptions when so much is concentrated in media coverage on these huge individual auction prices achieved? Ed?
No, I don't. I mean, I think the auction process, has been fundamental to repricing the art market now for as long as anybody can remember. And I think the establishment of prices in an open market situation is very beneficial. And I think we are, and I think the whole market benefits from that. So those focuses on those big public prices drives the confidence in the market and allows de Koonings to be sold at $35 million. You know, privately, because actually there's been a big focus on the Christie sale of a de Kooning that sold made $65 million.
We'll be on to questions
2 years ago.
in a moment.
So you know, I think it's a very, very important part of the market, and we would all suffer if attention wasn't paid on these.
And with the final question before we move to the audience, with that extraordinary price for the Leonardo, for example, you as a dealer, did you think this sort of recalibrates prices in a much more general way?
Absolutely not.
No.
And I have to disagree slightly with Ed, because I think the auction market is also full of float. We dealers find extraordinary opportunities at auction. Sometimes in the private market you can actually sell better than the auction market. So it is only one way and one route to price and reprice the market. But I don't think it has such a direct influence on every aspect of it.
What do you think, Mark? Did you have to rethink the valuation of the Rockefeller collection in the light of the Selfton Window?
No, I think the impact was that many collectors suddenly thought that their works of art would be worth something approaching $450 million.
That's a problem.
and that's not the case. I think the number of works of art that have been sold at above $50 million or $150 million or $400 million gives confidence generally to the levels of money that are paid for works of art, and that's across dealers, for museums and institutions who are buying. It does give them some data points in terms of overall acquisitions.
Okay. Now, we've got 5 minutes for questions. Would anyone like to ask a question? No? Okay. Yes.
In the panels before, you were talking about the influence of Instagram for an artist, or VR now, even being sold in galleries only. I know the three of you are dealing, of course, with videos, and you have your social media. Does it influence really your work, or not at all? Or you're doing that because you have to do it?
I think I heard the question, and I think it was whether or not we are embracing the use of social media as businesses. Is that right? Yeah, and we absolutely are. I mean, it's fundamental now. I mean, you know, the use of WeChat in China to get to the Asian client base there. You know, Instagram. It's you know, some of us hope and pray for the end of the catalogue to be replaced by some sort of electronic form of communication to lots of people very efficiently. No, it's absolutely fundamental. And you know, the client base is so different now. They tend to be traveling a huge amount. They live in many different houses around the world. You know, you don't get them by sending a catalogue to a house that they left 3 weeks ago. And so they're doing everything on.
And Dominique, Brett Gorvy's a tremendous force on Instagram, isn't he? Is that one of the reasons why you poached him?
No, but to my surprise, we've started selling works to Instagram, and this was a complete revelation. We posted a work 3 years ago from the Miami Art Fair, and literally got a call from an unknown collector, or at least not known to us, and who bought the work from Instagram. And more we do transaction from works that are being posted from the gallery's Instagram. And that is a complete new way of doing business that personally I was never expecting to be so useful.
And you find it transformative, do you?
Completely.
Any other questions? Yep.
Do you think, and I think earlier, I believe it was you, Amy, mentioning the advent or the beginning of the era of the pooled resources for guarantees, meaning that, call it guarantee funds or guarantee consortium. Do you think this is going to really change the dynamic on how the guarantee market is happening and really the motivation to give guarantees, not so much to own the art, but actually to speculate on the potential upside if the art gets sold at a higher price? Ed, again?
I mean, there are obviously sort of funds of pooled money that look for opportunities to guarantee things. No, I mean, the idea of financing deals in the market has become very attractive to lots of people who, I'm sure all the auction houses will tell you that there are, lots of people not just wanting to be first in the queue for that bucket of money with the Richter, but first in the queue to be offered opportunities to guarantee things with their own money at auction, because they see that as a potentially big return on investment if they get it right. And I think as the numbers get bigger, you probably are going to see more sort of collaborations and funds and things like that getting in.
Because Mark, can we ask, it might be sensitive, but is there an element to the collaboration of the third parties with Rockefeller, or, and it's a very big deal?
I think the answer goes ultimately to the question of the expectation of the sellers who want assurance through a guarantee scenario that their works will make a certain amount of money, or that they will have the capital to distribute to their heirs or to their beneficiaries. And whether or not it's not so much in an art fund context that I think of that, but rather various sources of capital that the auction houses or dealers need in order to fund their ongoing businesses.